July 21, 1997. Lancaster, Texas. In a quiet neighborhood where front doors stayed unlocked, a 71-year-old woman answered the phone. On the other end, her neighbor asked for a simple favor, a cup of sugar. Minutes later, that neighbor would walk out of the house, leaving behind a scene so brutal. It would take 16 years to close. And this wouldn't be the only murder tied to her name. In June 2013, Texas carried out its 500th execution since the death penalty was reinstated. On that day, Kimberly McCarthy became the first woman executed in the United States in nearly 3 years. But this wasn't the end of her story, it was the final chapter of a life that began with promise and ended in lethal injection. Today, we're going to go back to the summer of 1997. Dorothy Booth was a retired psychology professor. At 71, she still enjoyed painting, reading, and chatting with neighbors. She was kind, trusting, and deeply rooted in her Lancaster community. Kimberly McCarthy lived just a house away. Years earlier, she had worked as an occupational therapist, but that life was long gone. Crack cocaine had taken over, and with each year, the addiction grew more desperate. On that hot July afternoon, Dorothy's phone rang. Kimberly's voice was friendly, casual. Could she borrow some sugar? Dorothy had known her for years. It was nothing unusual. She opened her door. Kimberly stepped inside, but she wasn't there for sugar. Hidden somewhere in her clothing was a 10-inch butcher knife. Moments later, Kimberly pulled it out and stabbed Dorothy 5 times. Then she grabbed a heavy candle holder and struck her across the face. Dorothy collapsed, but Kimberly wasn't finished. She cut off Dorothy's left ring finger to steal her diamond wedding ring. With Dorothy lying dead on her kitchen floor, Kimberly ransacked the house, grabbing cash, credit cards, and anything she could carry. She left in Dorothy's white Mercedes and drove straight to a crack house. By that night, she had pawned the ring for $200 and used Dorothy's credit cards 4 separate times, including at a liquor store just blocks away. That night, Dorothy Booth's life ended, and Kimberly had vanished, swallowed up by her addiction and the lies that came with it. The investigation moved fast. Within days, police had a search warrant for Kimberly's home. Inside, they found the butcher knife, scrubbed clean. But when forensic experts dismantled the handle, they found traces of blood hidden deep in the seams. It was Dorothy's. Investigators also recovered Dorothy's ID and matched Kimberly to CCTV footage of the stolen credit card purchases. There was no evidence of anyone else being involved, just her. Kimberly wasn't always this person. She had once been married, had a son, and built a career helping people regain their independence after injury. But her life began to unravel in the late 80s and early 90s. Crack cocaine became her center of gravity. Her arrest record grew: forgery in 1990, prostitution, theft of services. The addiction took everything: her marriage, her career, her stability. After her arrest, Kimberly gave police a written statement. The words were hers, but the story felt like a last-ditch attempt to rewrite the truth. She said it all began sometime after midnight on July 21st at her home. 2 men, drug dealers she knew only as Kilo and JC, had been hanging around, partying and using with her. But when the money ran out and the high wore off, things turned ugly. They weren't just frustrated. They got loud, even aggressive. And Kimberly claimed they threatened to hurt her if she didn't come up with something fast. And that's when the plan was born. Kilo told her to call Dorothy and ask to borrow some sugar. Nothing suspicious, just a neighborly favor. But it wasn't sugar they were after. Kimberly claimed she stayed outside, but Kilo and JC didn't. They forced their way in, and minutes later, they walked out carrying Dorothy's purse, her car keys, and anything else they could grab. Kimberly climbed behind the wheel of Dorothy's white Mercedes and drove away. She later admitted pawning Dorothy's belongings for cash, using her credit cards to buy cigarettes and liquor, and trading them all for more crack. The problem? There was no trace of Kilo or JC. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. The physical evidence against her was overwhelming. Dorothy's blood was on the knife. Her ID was in Kimberly's possession, and surveillance footage showed Kimberly using the stolen cards. And for the jury, that was enough. In November 1998, they convicted her of capital murder and sentenced her to death. But this wasn't the whole story. Long before Dorothy opened her door that day, there had been warning signs, dark, violent signs that Kimberly was capable of far worse than anyone wanted to believe. During sentencing, prosecutors revealed something else. DNA linked Kimberly to two unsolved murders from 1988, almost 10 years earlier. Both victims were elderly women from Dallas County, 81-year-old Maggie Harding and 85-year-old Jetty Lucas. Both had been murdered inside their homes, and both cases had gone cold. But now the threads were suddenly tied together. Maggie wasn't a stranger to Kimberly. She had known her nearly her entire life. A trusted family friend who had helped plan Kimberly's wedding, let her store furniture at her house, and welcomed her as if she were her own family. But none of that mattered when Kimberly walked through her door in December 1988. Kimberly had once done part-time office work for Maggie, which had been enough to earn her trust and enough to learn the layout of her home. But Kimberly had noticed something else. According to Maggie's niece, her aunt kept a large amount of cash in the house. Not in a bank, not locked in a safe, but inside her home, and Kimberly knew it. Maggie was stabbed repeatedly through the chest, the abdomen, and the face. One of the wounds pierced straight into her heart. But that wasn't all. Her jaw was broken, her cheekbone shattered, and her brain was bleeding. The kind of injuries that don't come from a single moment of rage, but from a sustained brutal attack, likely with a metal meat tenderizer that police later found in the kitchen sink. And when it was over, her purse was gone. Just days later, another call came in. This time, it was Jetty Lucas, 85 years old, physically disabled, and barely able to defend herself. She was a distant cousin of Kimberly's mother, but those family ties meant nothing when the front door closed. Jetty was stabbed in the face, straight through her eyes. Her head and neck were struck with such force that one of her ears was torn, her skull fractured, and her brain bleeding from within. Lying near her body was a claw hammer, its curved end still stained. And just like before, her wallet and purse had been emptied. The similarities between the two cases were hard to ignore. Both victims were elderly women. Both trusted Kimberly, and both had been beaten, stabbed, and left for dead. And every time Kimberly had walked away with just enough cash to get high again. She was never tried for these previous murders, but investigators said the DNA told its own story. But Kimberly wasn't one to give up easily. She appealed, and in 2001, she won on a legal technicality. Her confession was taken without her lawyer present, but in 2002, she was retried, convicted again, and sentenced to death once more. Over the next decade, Kimberly's lawyers continued to fight. They said she was a drug addict, not a serial killer, and claimed race had played a role in her sentencing, but none of it changed the outcome. Execution dates came and went in January and April of 2013, both delayed at the last moment. But on June 26th, there would be no more stays. Kimberly spent her final hours behind thick concrete walls just a few feet from the room where it would all end. She hadn't spoken to reporters in years, refusing every request. But with the guards, she let a few jokes slip. Nothing big, just brief moments of levity in a day otherwise wrapped in silence. She wasn't allowed to choose a special final meal. They brought her a last breakfast, oatmeal, fruit, and chicken sandwiches at 1:48 a.m. She ate in the stillness of the early morning, then spent the rest of the day packing up what little she had left. She met with the chaplain, spoke with her spiritual advisor, and even sat for a final visit with the man who had once been her husband, and then she waited. When strapped to the gurney, her last words were clear: "This is not a loss. This is a win. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all. As the drugs started to take effect, she said, God is great, before closing her eyes. She took hard, raspy, loud breaths for several seconds before becoming quiet. Then her chest moved up and down for another minute before she stopped breathing. Kimberly McCarthy was pronounced dead at 6:37 p.m. She was 52 years old. Kimberly became the 500th person executed by lethal injection in Texas since the reinstatement and the first woman executed in the United States in nearly 3 years. After the execution, Dorothy Booth's daughter, Donna Aldred, said her mother was an incredible woman taken too soon. The finality of this event after nearly 15 years has allowed me to say goodbye to my mother. We are grateful to see justice fulfilled. Kimberly never expressed remorse for Dorothy's death, or for Maggie Harding and Jetty Lucas. And so the question remains, was this justice served, or just another tragedy in a long chain of them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe, like, and share for more true crime stories.